Spiritual Direction from Dante, Avoiding the Inferno, a book by Father Paul Pearson of the Oratory. Canto 24. Topics: Depending upon the opinion of others, Stumbling blocks and stepping stones, Perseverance on the long road, Financial freedom and freedom of conscience. We often burden ourselves psychologically and spiritually by judging ourselves according to the reactions of others. We examine ourselves in the mirror of their response to us and become addicted to their approval. But we all too often misinterpret the motives of others. What did that comment mean? And we imagine that we are the focus of their thoughts and the target of their actions. But so often we are not their focus. This thinking, it's all about me, recalls a favorite scene from Casablanca. The con artist, played by Peter Lorre, is selling travel documents. And his exchange with Rick, played by Humphrey Bogart, is painfully human in its self-centeredness. "You despise me, don't you?" he says. And Humphrey says, "If I gave you any thought, I probably would." Dante begins this canto with an extended image: frost that disappears at the rising of the sun. This might seem to be merely a sort of literary flourish on Dante's part, and it certainly is that. He goes to great length to paint the picture for us, so much so that it is easy to forget the purpose of the image. Dante's mood has been strongly affected by Virgil's anger, leaving him downcast for a while. But that dark mood disappears like the frost in the sun when Virgil looks kindly at Dante. It is easy to ignore the dramatic effects our own moods can have on those around us. We naturally reflect and respond to the emotional states of those we care about. We think that what we feel remains hidden inside of us, but we carry it on our faces as clearly as the anger was written on Virgil's brow. As we try to progress in the spiritual life, we expect, with our good intentions and firm resolutions, that life will cooperate with us. Somehow, God will acknowledge the beginning we've made and offer a sign of his approval, a small reward for good behavior. And sometimes there are wonderful signs that confirm we are on the right path and God is with us. But often, the path not only looks steep and difficult, it seems to disappear entirely. Where is God? And what is he doing to me? The saints have experienced what they call spiritual desolation, a feeling of being abandoned by God. But even when he seems most distant, perhaps especially when he seems distant, he is working in a surprising way. What looks like a stumbling block becomes a stepping stone. Everything, both what we find pleasant and what we find perplexing or hurtful, is a tool in the hands of God, shaping us into the saints we were created to be. Romans 8:28 says, "We know that in everything God works for good with those who love him." There is no way out of the ditch of the hypocrites except by climbing up the ruins of the collapsed bridge. This way out seems almost impossibly steep to Dante. Virgil's care for Dante as he faces his fear of the climb out of the ditch, and during the ascent himself, is more than a personal affection or charity. It is a symbol of the sort of care God lavishes upon us during our spiritual journey. As spiritual pilgrims, we don't always need to know the way, but to be confident that we, too, are being directed and assisted by a loving God who is with us each step of the way. Dante signifies this divine care first by that sweet and gracious look of Virgil, showing the willingness and even eagerness with which God greets our pleas for help. We do not need to convince God to assist us. The initiative is his. He is more eager for our progress than we seem to be. Dante draws attention to how personal this care is by referring to Virgil's opening wide his arms and taking Dante by the hand. The help isn't to be some distant or abstract thing, a few commandments or chastisements now and then. God comes himself to help us, walking hand in hand. There is no greater manifestation of this truth than the incarnation itself. God could perhaps have saved us in another way, and St. Thomas Aquinas certainly thought that he could. But God chose to become man because he desired to come in person to help us. His love for us could be expressed so vividly in no other way. Finally, in line 29, we see Virgil giving Dante step-by-step directions, keeping him from giving in to his fears by making him focus on the immediate task at hand, saying, "Cling tight to that one and climb up, but test it first to see if it will hold." In his providence, God arranges precisely what we need, no more, no less. We do not need to think about how long the path to holiness is. Our job is merely to take the next step, a step specially arranged by a loving God, and then to trust God on the remainder of the journey. Providentially, the stones of the fallen bridge have become the stairs by which Virgil and Dante climb out of the pit of the hypocrites. Even when they oppose God, the hypocrites, and everyone else, still end up being instruments of God's plan of salvation. Even their rejection of the prophetic truth given to Caiaphas is used by God for good. It makes Virgil and Dante's trip possible. We'll see this holding true in the very pit of hell with Satan himself, that no one escapes God's providence. For anyone who has exerted himself to the very limits of his abilities, the imagery of the sentence, "My breath has been milked dry out of my lungs," will ring perfectly true. We have come to expect immediate results, and we prefer those results with as little effort as possible. Our kitchens might be filled with labor-saving devices, but there's no such thing in the spiritual life. St. Paul refers to walking in the spiritual path as a fight or as running a race. Other authors call it a spiritual combat. One thing is clear. It is hard work, and if we want to go to heaven, we need to be prepared to exert ourselves. These battles or races might not be as quick. They are often more like marathons than sprints. But be ready to persevere. Hebrews 12:1 says, "And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us." One of the greatest obstacles in the spiritual life, perhaps even a greater one in our day than in Dante's, is a lack of fortitude or courage in the face of hard work or pain. The soft pillows of down Virgil describes so dismissively could symbolize so much in our lives. We have grown so accustomed to comfort and ease that we are used to employing only a small fraction of our power. We don't even know we have the power to do so much more. Working to the fullness of our strength is something very few people have experienced. We can be so afraid of being tired or being in pain that we despair of the journey. But what do the fearful or slothful have to show for their lives? Nothing more than smoke and air or foam upon the sea. A sad epitaph for those who are prevented from running the noble race for salvation because of a lack of courage. Virgil reminds Dante that they have a long way to go and they need to keep moving. This little pit hardly compares to the climb they have ahead of them, out of the center of the earth and up Mount Purgatory. Their journey is just beginning. But Dante has learned his lesson well. He refuses to let himself be governed merely by how he feels at the moment. He realizes that right now he needs to push ahead, and so he does. And he says, "Let's go, for I am bold and strong." The imagery of Dante's not being able to speak quite normally because of being out of breath is immediately echoed by the voice he hears coming out of the next ditch, a voice that Dante says is ill-suited to form words. Dante can hear the voice, but can't make out what is being said. In addition to the difficulty Dante has had hearing what is being said in the pit, he also cannot see. This ditch is characterized by extreme darkness, and Dante, from his position at the top of the arch of the bridge over the pit, can make nothing out at the bottom. Here dwell those who are certainly children of the darkness or of the night. In fact, the sinners here seem to elude all of the senses. They move like thieves in the night, for that is what they are, although Dante has yet to discover this. Dante's eagerness to find out whom he's heard speaking and what is being punished in this pit overcomes his weariness, and he asks Virgil whether they can climb down to the short side of the pit to investigate. Virgil, especially after his earlier encouragement to shake off sluggishness, is only too happy to comply. The pit is filled with an amazing assortment of snakes and serpents. The serpents call to mind the Garden of Eden and might seem to symbolize sin in general, but no particular sin is immediately signified. Who are these sinners, and for what sin are they being punished? Their identity is not revealed. That very fact, as we shall see, is itself revealing. The first clue we have to what is going on here is the precise way in which some of the snakes attack the souls. Their wrists are bound by the snakes behind the sinners' backs and then immobilized against their backs. The souls are like handcuffed criminals arrested by the police. Next, we are distracted by the sight of a sinner being bitten by a snake at the nape of the neck. But rather than slowly being affected by poison, the man bursts into flames and disappears in a heap of ashes. And if this isn't confusing enough, the heap immediately reforms itself and returns to its previous form, like a phoenix rising from the ashes. The soul looks around himself, confused at what has just happened to him. And for what sin is this an appropriate punishment? It might seem strange that a religion that preaches detachment from material things also defends the basic human right to ownership of private property. Although we can easily fall into the temptation of placing our trust in material wealth, eliminating personal ownership would not solve the problem. In fact, it would cause an even greater one. If we are to have freedom to decide to live according to God's laws and our own conscience, we have to have some sort of financial independence. If someone else gives us what we need, that person can compel us to act merely by withholding what we need for life. As the old saying goes, he who pays the piper calls the tune. Line 127, the soul who introduces himself to Dante is Vanni Fucci, and he is famous as a man of violence and bloodshed. If that is true, then what is he doing down here instead of on the river of Phlegethon and the circle of violence? What people didn't know about him was that he was also a thief. Not nearly as heroic seeming as his more famous sins. When Fucci hears Dante's questioning, he blushes with shame. A shame at having been found out. Being a thief is not his disgrace. Being caught is. His exposure, he says, causes him more pain than the death he endured. And he says, "It pains me that you've caught me here, thrust in the misery where you see me now, more than it pained me to be snatched from life." Because he was a thief, and disguise and darkness were the tools of his trade. For him, being caught is a failure. Not only is Fucci's own cover blown, now we know all of those who are being punished here. Thieves. Now the earlier images begin to make sense. This trench of hell should be noted for its darkness, for these sinners worked like a thief in the night. They did all they could to escape being seen or heard, and their success depended upon it. Their appearance is obscured, even their voices seem disguised. It also pains Fucci that it is not within his power to evade Dante's questions. He resents Dante for doing this to him, and he will find some way to get back at him. In retaliation for having his cover blown by Dante, Fucci foretells the events that will lead to Dante's exile. He speaks merely out of vengeance in saying, "I've told you this for spite, to bring you grief."